Good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Crum, Managing Partner of SKC & Co. CPAs, and welcome to Office Hours today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording today's session as we usually do. So if there's a colleague who couldn't join, or if you want to reference this back at any point, we will be sending you a link in an email later on, and we will also have this posted on our website under the resources section. As with all office hours, we invite you to post questions in the chat throughout our presentation. We do monitor that. Any questions we don't get to, whether they're in the chat or they're some of the pre-submitted questions with registration, we will provide those answers in a follow-up email. So today's topic is incredibly important, and we're so very lucky to have Aoife Donovan, licensed counselor at Peace of Mind Counseling Services. She is a first-generation immigrant from Taiwan, now pursuing a doctoral degree in traumatology. She is fluent in Taiwanese, Mandarin Chinese, and English. Aoife holds a master's in clinical mental health counseling and is trained in EMDR and brain spotting. Welcome, Aoife.
Thank you. Thank you. My honor to be here.
And I have to tell everyone how lucky I feel to have you here today. You were a guest on the Upstream Leader podcast, and you did 2 amazing podcasts with them. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you. It was my honor to be here, and I can't wait to share this with everyone. It's my passion.
It definitely comes across for sure. And this is a topic that we've wanted to do on office hours for quite some time now, and we just couldn't find the right guest. Mental health is something that we really want to be able through this podcast to destigmatize it in the workplace. And it's so much more than burnout. And we didn't want to bring in an expert in work-life balance because although that's a component of the overall mental health picture, it's just a very small component of it. And we really want to dig in a little bit deeper today and go into much more detail and sort of widen our base of knowledge. So we definitely want to pull back that curtain on mental health and hope that it becomes something that we can talk about and work to improve together. So from my background, working in public accounting for 20 years, burnout is a term that we hear very often in our industry. And I think it's a word that has spread and become a little bit more mainstream after COVID. So Aoife, let me ask you to level set things for the audience for a little bit. What does burnout mean in a clinical sense? And how does that impact and show up in our lives?
Okay, so before we get into what burnout really means, we must understand how crises showed up and how we recognize them. So crises can show up in 3 different ways. They look like this: stress, anxiety, and burnout. In a clinical sense, they are fight, flight, and freeze. People usually see stress and anxiety and burnout as 3 interchangeable conditions. In fact, they're very different. But understanding the ideology of each emotion can prepare you as a leader to address the issues and show up for your team. So, what is stress? The symptoms of stress and anxiety often look very similar. Well, the source of stress usually is external, outside of you, whereas anxiety tends to be an internal response. It's coming from inside. Stress comes from experiences of physical, mental, emotional, and relational factors that cause a person to feel overwhelmed. For example, physical pain, taking on too much work. I called it white knuckle through method. Marital issues, death in the family, or a newborn baby. We all been there. So the antidote to your external stress is to draw a firm boundaries in your life and prioritize your life. And we will talk about boundaries later. But secondly, what is anxiety? Anxiety comes from your inner thoughts. A lot of them are up here. Our worries, ruminations, racing thoughts, overthinking, feeling of helplessness, and the what ifs. Anxiety is how a person internalizes their real life experience. For example, I'm going to pick on my mother-in-law. You hear your retired mother-in-law say, "I'm so stressed out." And you're thinking, what do you have to stressed out about? You're retired, you live in a beautiful home, and you have so much money in your 401k. What do you have to stress over? In other words, my mother-in-law is not stressed out. She has anxiety issues. So, what is burnout? And I'm going to take my time on this. The worst part of crisis is burnout. And most of us heard, and I'm going to mess up his name, Pavlov and his conditioned reflex dogs. When the dinner bell rang, the dog started to salivate. You remember that story? In 1924, Pavlov made another grand discovery related to trauma. In one spring, the thaw in St. Petersburg flooded Pavlov's basement laboratory. The dogs survived the flood physically uninjured, but they were broken down emotionally, behaviorally, and physiologically. After the traumatic incident, many of them lay around motionless and lost curiosity about their surroundings. Pavlov found that after long term exposure to extreme stress, these dogs found a new internal equilibrium, a new normal, different from the previous two emotions, stress and anxiety. During the flood, Pavlov's cage dogs were trapped in their cage, while their brain were programmed to run and escape when in danger. This resulted in a collision of two physical impulses. One is excitation, and the other one is inhibition. And when this happens, it leads to a learned helplessness, a phenomenon that is critical to understand for burnout. After all, the agony of dogs were no different from children who are abused by their parents or teachers. Women who are trapped in violent, intimate relationship who struggle with two opposing emotions. One is to maintain belonging, a loving relationship, and the other to escape their pain, hurt. As you see, the dog gave up. The dogs gave up, and they know it is useless to run away. The woman in violent, intimate relationships gave up as well. They become immobile and lose curiosity about their surroundings. This is why the burnout individual cannot get out of bed. He or she does not care to take a shower or go outside. We all seen that before. Burnout starts out like stress and anxiety, but it will evolve into burnout if it left untreated. Burnout sounds like, I am so done, or I cannot do it anymore. I am drowning, or I'm in survival mode. It operates out of your parasympathetic system. It is involuntary. You can't help it. It immobilizes you. It says, I can't. Whereas stress and anxiety or fight and flight operate out of your sympathetic system. It's voluntary. It says, I can fight you. I can run. Burnout starts out innocently and insidiously, but it will eventually manifest through your body somatically. Your body does keep a score of your stress, anxiety, and burnout. For example, just to name a few, stomach ulcers, heart attacks. We see them in a lot of our office. Hypertension, high blood pressure. I didn't know that hypertension is high blood pressure. Autoimmune disease and cancer. You can read all about it from The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Basil Mendecook. I highly recommend that book. Or When the Body Says No by Gabriel Matate, Dr. Gabriel Matate. It's a great book. I highly recommend that book.
So that was so much to unpack for just the first question. And I have
Yeah.
I mean, to my own takeaways, and again, this is when in prepping for this, it was so important for us to have an understanding for people of the different areas and impacts of mental health, because I think that's a big reason why we don't talk about it, whether that's in, I'll call it our real lives outside of work or our work lives. It's because there's either a misunderstanding or we don't understand it. And I'll own up to the fact that your comparison of stress and anxiety is not one that was top of mind for me, right? So stress being something inflicted upon us from external factors, and anxiety being something from us that we create internally. Makes
Exactly.
complete sense. Makes
Yeah.
complete sense now that
Yeah.
you've said it.
Yeah.
Never really gave the time or the thought process myself to really think about that. And so I appreciate that clarity. And I do love the story about Pavlov's dogs, because I think in Psychology 101, everyone has heard the stories about ringing the bell and salivating. And
Yeah.
I've never heard the story about the flood in the basement and that sort of unintended study that happened about the prolonged trauma that the
Yeah.
dogs went through and what
Yeah.
that impact was, which is also another very, very good analogy of what we as people go through, right, in stressors in life and trauma or crises that we may be in for a prolonged period of time. And I
Yeah.
think that's what your point on burnout was, is that it's that prolonged exposure to these situations of trauma or crisis or great stress that results in that burnout.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, how do we as business owners or leaders of teams manage our own stress and that of our team? And, we hear people talk about more work-life balance and more flexibility, but is it really that simple?
That is a great question. And I love to answer this question. I would love to use the bank account as an example, because we all financial advisors here, so everybody can relate to it better. When a person's emotional balance is low, it isn't easy to withdraw. For a long time, very little emotional support has been deposited into this person's account. So when the balance is low, and again, accounting term, he hoards what little he has in the account. It will be hard for that person to make a emotional withdrawal to support others because he does not know when the next deposit will be made. For example, most of you have flown in a plane before and you have seen the flight safety demonstration. They ask you to put your mask on yourself before you help others. So finding balance is not as simple as we think, but it is not impossible. I believe the way to find balance is to cultivate the authentic self's curiosity. Who are you, minus career, family, and friends? Who are you when there's no one to compare to or compete with? What would you rather do when there is no cares in this world? I would encourage to cultivate that curiosity while you balance work and family. I encourage you to build up your emotional bank first before you pour into others. Another example is one of my best friend told me this when I was in Taiwan a few days ago. She said she devoted her life to take care of her mother who had liver cancer. After her mother passed away, she said she found no meaning in her life. She did not know what to do with herself. And I thought, how sad. She thinks her sole purpose in life is to take care of someone else. She is now battling breast cancer and is quite depressed. Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, in there, Dr. Stuart Brown's a psychiatrist and a researcher for National Institute for Play, says that the lack of play has affected our output in the office. So let me ask you, how do you play? No, not how your spouse wants to play, not how your children want to play. Now, not how your employee wants to play. With our desperation, try to be seen, heard, and valued, we default back to our coping skills. And we have to become very intentional about cultivating rest and play. So, my question for you is, how do you play when you're by yourself? How do you spend your time? That is, let go of your business productivity and exhaustion as a measure of your self worth.
That is terrific advice. And I will tell you, I've talked to several other leaders and members on SKC's team, and we talk often about the importance of recharging yourself, because we can't show up, as you say, for others if we are ourselves depleted. And sometimes I think, we've heard the term self-care in the world, and very often I think, and predominantly I'll pick on my gender, women don't necessarily put themselves first as often as probably should happen. And I'm sure there's plenty of men that are in that situation as well. And I think that's what's another element that's so important to tell people. You not only is it okay to do that, but you have to do that, right? Because if you don't
Right.
take care of yourself, you're not going to show up for those in your world the way that they deserve for you to show up, or the way that you can show up, right? Whether that's your spouse, your family, your team at the office, whomever that is, right? It's the investment starts with us before we can give to others.
Right. It becomes a codependency relationship. Yeah.
Mhm.
And when you do that, then where is the self? And when there is no self, then you just get, continue to do that, you'll give up, and it's burnout follows.
Mhm. Sure,
Mhm,
there's nothing left, right?
mhm, mhm, yeah.
You mentioned coping. We all have different ways of coping. How can a business owner lead a team when everyone has their own way or method of coping through the different things that they experience?
Yeah, right. A coping mechanism is a way a person protects his or her heart. And since we were born, we have learned to repress our feelings, to preserve a sense of idyllic relationship with our caretakers. We repress our feelings due to the fear of abandonment, rejection, and not fitting in. As we move on to society, whenever we sense abandonment, rejection, or not fitting in, we automatically bring those coping skills up and transfer them to how we relate to our coworkers, friends, and family. We cope with emotional repression or coping mechanisms like harsh self judgment, people pleasing, avoidance, numbing, perfectionism, just to name a few, especially financial world. We focus on caring for other people's emotional needs, feeling responsible for them rather than our own. By the way, the above coping mechanisms are more than a good recipe for alcoholism. They're also a good recipe for cancer. So I think the best way to lead a team and navigate through each individual's coping mechanism is to, number one, get to know your team. When you see, hear, and value your employees, you form a connection between humans. Since everyone has a different coping skills, instead of controlling their behaviors, you influence them and model the right behavior within your company's culture. History has proven that dictatorship does not work very well. Number two, influence instead of controlling. As a leader, model healthy behavior by shutting down your computer on time, replying your emails as at an appropriate time, not 11 p.m., not 4 p.m., not midnight. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm married to a managing partner of CPA firm, and when he sent emails out late at night, he made me doubt my self-worth. We therapists have feelings too.
Mhm.
So when your employees see you emailing them at 11 p.m., what kind of messages are you sending them? Your business is not your self-worth. Focus on discovering your authentic self and your family and practicing mindfulness of your present and not your past, not your future. Stop ruminating that. So there's my gist of that.
Easier said than done. We'll get into some ways to actually do that in just a few minutes. But I mean, my personal belief as a business owner is that business owners and leaders have a responsibility to our team to support them as best as we can, both inside and outside our organizations. In reality, we can't separate the fact that we're humans, right? You know, we
Mhm,
we
mhm,
spend a heck of a lot of time together in a workplace environment. We all have lives outside of the workplace environment, but we're still that same person. And so, you know, we carry things from personal into work and vice versa. It's very, very, very difficult and certainly not sustainable to compartmentalize in our lives.
mhm.
And, you know, there's little, if any, training in this space for a business owner or a leader, really. So what are your thoughts or advice around showing up for your team with respect to a trauma they may have gone through or a crisis they may be in, you know, whether that's manifesting itself as anxiety or depression or something else? Because ultimately, if it's something that's happening outside of work, that is going to eventually show up in some way in the work environment.
So you're saying that how to show up for your team when they manifest their anxiety or depression at work. Um, Trauma experience differs for each individual. We can witness the same traumatic experience at the same time, but your traumatic experience belongs to your reality. And mine are my reality. How do we show up or respond with little or no training? Well, it is a lot like how you show up for your children with little or no training, because they do not come with a manual. I say this is when we take off the hat that of being the boss or the parent and put on the hat of empathy. I'm human just like you, and start listening. Empathy is a respectful understanding of what the other person is experiencing. Empathy is knowing and understanding your deepest darkness and be willing to sit there with someone else by Brene Brown. Let me read that again. Empathy is knowing and understanding your deepest darkness and be willing to sit there with someone else. Brene Brown said that. As leaders, we often have the strong urge to give advice and reassurance and to explain our own position or feelings. The leaders are problem solvers. Empathy, on the other hand, causes us to set all opinion, advice, or reassurance aside and listen to the other person's problems as a human. So, how do we do that? Number one, you will repeat back the gist of what you heard. When a person feels like he or she um, is seen, heard, and valued, he will be able to connect to you on a human level. Number two, you will have time to process what you heard when you listen. When you mirror back the gist of what you heard, it allows you time and the space to process what is happening. Ask yourself this question: if this happened to me, how would I feel? Number three, you will stop the defensiveness when you repeat back the gist of what you heard. In other words, turn off the problem solving button and put on your listening ear to really listen to their emotional needs and empathize with them. I call this the sitting in the suck together. When we listen with the intention to understand, we stop the defensiveness. We offer empathy. We listen with unconditional positive regard. I thought that was such a nice term. It makes me sound so smart when I said unconditional positive regard and genuine concern about the other person's story. So the person center approach is the key to support your teammates' grieving process.
That is the best mini lesson in empathy that I've ever heard. I wish that I had heard that 15 plus years ago. And I want to make a quick, plea out there to anyone who's on in the audience. If you know the DISC analysis, the personality assessment, right? So I'm a high D, and all that means, right? So empathy for me is something that I'm going to say doesn't come naturally, but I intellectually understand the importance of it. And it's not that empathy doesn't come naturally for me. It's just, it's something for me that isn't just part of my personality, right? I have to make sure that I'm conscious about it and that I am intentional in bringing it into my leadership style and bringing it into how I show up at work. And so my plea, I guess, to other business owners out there is that anyone can learn how to do this, and anyone can work this into conversations that you have or experiences that you're in, because that's really our jobs. As I've said before, I really think that as leaders, it's not just our job to grow the company and be the face of the organization and, drive profitability. It's our job to support our team, and I wish that I had known that mini lesson in
Oh,
empathy a long time ago, because I went
oh,
through a lot of internal sort of turmoil myself, not knowing why it was so hard for me to understand other people's positions when I was much younger. So that
oh,
is a great way to put it. And I'm going to go back and re-listen to that segment again. But
yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being vulnerable with us, Sarah. That was so
oh,
wonderful.
and I want to kind of just talk about how in the workplace environment, right, there are human resource regulations and around some of these sensitive subjects. And I'm not diminishing the legality or the importance of any of that, but there's a level of humanity that we all need to consider again as people, right? So Ethan, how do we reconcile that as leaders? And especially if maybe somebody is experiencing what I've just shared, where sort of sitting in the suck together, as you say, isn't their most favorite thing to do, or makes them feel uncomfortable. How do we as leaders take our role and not just move people into that sort of HR funnel to handle those sensitive topics?
Yeah, again, another great question. So, how do we balance human resource regulations and grace, a level of humanity? I'm a firm believer in second chances. This is where we use our boundaries. I can go on for another hour on setting boundaries, and that may be another session. But to make the long story short, a boundary is like a fence around your yard. Inside of you, your yard is your feelings, attitudes, behavior, choices, and values. You want to keep the bad out and the good inside. I highly recommend the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. You can read more about boundaries from that book. I use it a lot in my therapy room. The human resource regulations are like the fence that protects your company, as well as for the protection of its employees. Boundaries, this fence, should be based on your values or things that are important to you. As a leader, you can reconcile, again, accounting term, reconcile into two categories. One column, debit, credit, all right. One column, things you can control, which are your own feelings, attitudes, behavior, choices, and values. Under things you can control, you can do what you do best. And I'm going to give you permission to do this. That is problem solve and create an action plan. How does that look like within human resource regulations? For example, if you value spending time with family, set a firm boundary about working late. And that is something you can control. You can set an action plan. Your boundaries are yours and yours alone. And many of your boundaries may be similar with others, but others will be unique. Know your boundaries before entering a situation, like the regulations in human resources, right? So you will be less likely to do something you're not comfortable with. Number two, things you cannot control. The other side of the column. Um, The other person's attitudes, behavior, choices, and values, you cannot control that. You have no power over. You can offer what I call, this is the best I can do or cannot do on both sides of the fences. For example, after a good listening and validating and empathy and sitting in the darkness without judgment, you can offer as much as you can do within your power to help your employee and make sure that you spelled out what you can do within the human resources regulations. And this is an example. I'm going to say example. This is not real, but example. I do empathize with your misfortune, Mr. So and so. You're going to mirror back the gist of what you heard, but I cannot have you come in drunk every day. I can give you a month off without pay. Additionally, the company is willing to provide funds for a few sessions of therapy to help you through your difficulties. When you're sober up, you're welcome to come back because this is a very valuable employee, right? You want him back or her back. So this is only an example, but that gives you a taste of what you can do or cannot do within the human resource regulation. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I actually like that example because in some situations or in some companies, there would not be that second chance, if you will. It would
Hmm.
just be, you cannot show up to work intoxicated. You showed up to work intoxicated, therefore we have to terminate you, right? And so that's sort of, I mean, that may be an extreme example for sure, but there's wiggle room within your boundaries sometimes, is where I think you're leading us to, right? That,
Hmm. Hmm.
let's try to show up for our team member a little bit and provide that support and provide that help if it's within the boundaries of our rules and regulations as an organization.
Exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
So again, as leaders, and clearly my position on this personally is that we do have a responsibility to our people and those that we work with and are on our team. So as leaders, how do we help and support the removal of some of the barriers of past traumas that individuals on our team may have gone through, so that we can not only help them become better people, but how can we then help them remove those barriers of past trauma so that they can show up and be the best version of themselves at work as well?
Um, so I was reading this question. So you saying that how do we get over the barrier of our own traumatic experience, our own trauma, so we can help to get the best out of our people or help our people?
Well, more of, if our people have gone through traumas
Hmm. Hmm.
and that isn't affecting them showing up as the best version of themselves, how do
Okay.
we help support them in
Hmm.
removing those boundaries or barriers?
Okay. Um, First of all, I want to give a little bit background about this question. Henry Nouwen called the counselors the wounded healers. There is a reason he called us the wounded healers. Countertransference is the emotional entanglement that can happen when working with severely traumatized and abused individuals. That happened to me quite a bit. If the leader has unresolved trauma in his or her past, an employee's traumatic experience can trigger another person's traumatic pain. So, back to the question, when this happens, the leader is vulnerable to being over involved or over identifying with the other person. Over involved and over identifying with your employee can lead to danger of breaking your own boundaries and emotional exhaustions, eventually burnout. So if I do that for all my patients, I will be in big trouble. And this is why it is important for you to make sure that you have faced your own issues of hurt, brokenness, and healings before you help another person. Once you have found healing, it gives you the better ability to walk in someone else in the midst of their suffering. When you truly know how to heal and overcome your own suffering. You come out a stronger person. You can walk alongside of your employee in the shadow of the valley with confidence that only comes from knowing. So see a mental health counselor. Even just talk it out loud while processing your thoughts to your therapist or write them down in a journal. You find answers in your own confession. So to help your employees, help yourself first.
So it goes
Make sure
back
you're
to
okay.
that first piece of our segment where we talked about, I mean, I'm overusing self-care, but it's really, you can't, if you're not the best version of yourself, you cannot help bring out the best version of
Yeah.
those on your team. And that includes not only, getting the right rest and taking care of your,
Mm.
eating habits and exercise and all of that, but it really is recognizing and spending the time to take care of your own mental health, right? Which
Yeah.
sometimes, again, we're all human, sometimes we shy away from, right? But if we're going
Yes.
to show up and we're going to help our team members, we have to have our house in order, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I see lots and lots of patients, and I'll be in big trouble if I over identify with every one of them.
Sure, sure. And that's where that exhaustion sits in, right? And you said it, that it leads eventually to burnout again.
Yes.
So when we have someone on our team who is struggling, and again, in the confines or the boundaries of a business, how do we allow that individual to heal? And how much space or grace do we give them within the boundaries of a business environment?
So, how much grace means second chance or space, time do we give them when someone is struggling? Um, the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg is a great resource for professionals to give grace and space in a professional setting. The point is, how do we remain human when we are under trying conditions? We observe instead of evaluate. The Indian philosopher, I'm going to mess up this person's name, Krishnamurti once said that observing without evaluating is the highest form of human intelligence. When we observe, we acknowledge the needs of the other person on a emotional level. And this another good example. The husband came home uh, without milk as the wife asked him this morning. So evaluation looks like this. The wife comes down on him and says, "You never pay attention to my requests. You never care. I am not important to you." Observation. This is how observation looks like. Wife says, "Are you okay? You look sad." Husband says, "Yes, I have to lay off 2 people today. One of them was my very good friend." Wife says, "I am so sorry to hear that. I cannot imagine how you feel after you deliver the news. Did you have a chance to grab some milk?" Husband says, "Oh, no, I am so sorry." Wife says, "That's okay. Why don't we go out for a walk after dinner and grab it at the convenience store nearby?" Husband says, "Sure, it sounds good. Thank you for understanding." The truth is, we all deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. That is why I highly recommend that companies provide employees with mental health assistance programs to help those in need during crisis. Some companies will provide up to 6 to 8 counseling sessions for their employees, no question asked. Managing partners and owners of small business will say to me, "Well, we provide health insurance that provides mental health benefits." And that is very true. But as you know, the insurance will not reimburse your bill unless you have a diagnosis. We, the mental health providers, are the ones who have to come up with a diagnosis for you to submit to your health insurance. So here's the problem. There is some bad, there is still some bad stigma and shame attached to mental disorders. Schizophrenia, generalized anxiety disorder, major depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, or worse, paranoia disorder. Some of the patients do not want to have a diagnosis on their health record because of the stigma attached to the mental disorder. Thoughts like, how would this diagnosis affect my future pertain to life insurance? What would others think? What if my boss finds out? Would I lose my job? And many would rather suffer in silence than seek for help. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's a much deeper conversation about the broken aspect of our healthcare system, which again, we could probably do a whole other hour on. But, the message in that is seek help, right?
yeah.
Don't hide from it. And certainly the element that this is not something easily conquered alone, right?
Hmm.
And whether you're reaching out to those on your team or in your professional world to help you, who then can get you into counseling or therapy to have that conversation with somebody. I think that advice of providing counseling sessions, I'll call it off the health insurance record,
Yeah,
by a business owner is probably one of the best benefits, that we could possibly offer to our team. So I thank you for that suggestion.
yeah.
um, is there a time within, working with our team through, a tragedy or a trauma or a crisis, that we end up doing them a disservice by sort of continuing to keep them on and working with them, as opposed to, maybe not strongly suggesting that they go on a leave to really take the time for themselves to get the help they need?
Um, so my question for you is, would you do your business a disservice if you keep them on?
Mm,
When our brain is reacting to crisis, our brain is stuck in the fight, flight, and freeze, burnout mode. We need to give our employees the space and tools to heal. So, providing resources and mental health EAP services and give the employees time to filled up his or her own oxygen tank before he or she can come back to work. You cannot pour into others if your own tank is empty. Um, when your battery on your cell phone is running low, it will come up with a yellow bar warning, and your phone will ask if you want to select to work on the low battery mode. Most of the time, we think we will recharge soon, but we continue to scrolling, or like myself, keep working.
mhm,
Then your battery warning sign turns red, telling you your phone is about to die, and we continue to ignore it until it shuts down completely. That red bar on your phone is your burnout mode. In other words, you are doing yourself a disservice by putting your employee who is already in the burnout mode back to work. In this burnout mode, you will see behaviors like this: withdrawing from responsibilities, isolating from others, procrastinating, taking longer to get things done, using food, drugs, or alcohol to cope, taking frustrations out on others, skipping work, or coming in late and leaving early. So now you see you actually are doing yourself a disservice if you keep them on.
that is a great way to flip the script to that question. I like that.
Thank you.
So I want to just switch gears and focus on some of the key takeaways or best practices that business owners can implement. So can you give us some recommendations as business owners and leaders within our organizations of what we can do to show up for our team as it pertains to mental health?
Yeah. Remember the saying from the Godfather's movie? I always tell people, if I have a choice, I don't want to be Chinese, I want to be Italian. So the Godfather movie is my favorite movie. Michael Corleone said, it's not personal. This is strictly business. Regarding mental health, it is just the opposite. It's all personal.
Mm,
During crisis, our brain is stuck in survival mode. When one is stuck in a survival mode, it feels like a bear is chasing you. You're running to survive. You're thinking, I gotta live, man. I am more important than you. And that is why we're hyper vigilant, looking out for negativities. For example, um, no one can be trusted. No one is there truly comfort or support you. And a gentle touch will surely become a hurtful touch. Um, in 1958, Harry Harlow conducted an experiment. His most famous experiment involved giving young monkeys a choice between two different mothers. One was made of soft terry cloth but provided no food. The other one was made of barbed wire but provide nourishment from an attached baby bottle. The finding was surprisingly interesting. He found that the baby monkeys were more likely to stay physically close to the surrogate cloth mother who did not feed them than a mechanical mother who did feed them. My point is, do you want to lead a company that provide a safe, inviting, and trusting environment? Or a company like the mechanical mothers, I'm only here for the paycheck? Furthermore, this is for you to think about. Did you grow up with a mechanical mother who just provide nourishment, or a soft comfort cloth mother who influence you with love and nourishment? You, as a leader and business owner, you want to make sure that your employees are seen, heard, and valued by you. So how do you see, heard, and value your employees? I have 3 recommendations. Number 1, recognition, recognition, recognition. This is under the column of things you can control. You may strategize with your human resource team. How do you make sure your team is seen, heard by you? Partners, schedule lunch meetings with your employees. Get to know them. Recognize their birthdays, anniversary, or significant milestone of their careers. Number 2, validation, validation, validation. This is under the column of things you can control. The crisis and traumatic experiences belong to your employees, not yours. This is their storm, not your storm. Those are the things you have no power over. Let them know their sadness, anger, or disappointment is valid. Leaders, read up on bugs and learn how to validate another person's feelings. It is a skill. It took me a while to learn. I was first generation immigrant, remember? I was raised to problem fix, to make my point, and not to validate feelings. It is a valuable skill. Learn it. Number 3, permit yourself to be open-minded. Remember the permission slip we get from our teacher when we were younger? You feel powerful walking down the hallway. You can do whatever the permission slip says. The permission slips are powerful. You grow up with a schema that is totally different from another person. My story of Christmas is probably very different from your Christmas holidays, but my Chinese New Year will probably have a lot more fun than yours. Everyone has their own story in mind and how things should be done a certain way. Permit yourself to be open-minded to another person's stories. That's how I see it.
Love and compassion and understanding.
Mhm, mhm.
Mhm. So we did talk a lot about self-care and self-compassion as the leader of the organization or of a team. And so how does that play a role in building a culture of supporting mental health in the workplace? In other words, is it enough for the business owner to walk the talk in self-care and self-compassion, or are there more robust things that we can do to support mental health in the workplace?
Yeah, the Bible says, be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. The one is you. Listen, be kind one to another. Be kind to yourself first. Tender-hearted, forgiving one another. Again, forgiving one yourself first. Be kind to yourself. You got to fill your emotional tank up first before you can pour into other person. You know, the buddy breathing system. I mean, if you scuba dive, you share when your oxygen is running out, you share your oxygen with the other person back and forth so you can survive. But what if your oxygen tank is low? Both of you will die. Kristen Neff, who wrote the book on self-compassion, says it the best. Self-care requires self-kindness. If nothing else, ask yourself, what does that 5-year-old self wanted to be treated when you were 5? Recognizing we are only human, be vulnerable with each other, be mindful of our pain rather than ignoring it or tough it out. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so that's my simple explanation of that.
Great, terrific. And, just real quick, I know you talked about the, offering counseling sessions or therapy sessions to your team, but are there other services or benefits as business owners that we can offer our team in support of a more positive work environment?
Yeah, yeah. These are collected from my patients coming in to tell me that these are the services that provided for them and benefit them. So just to name a few, they actually have mental health days. I know you're paying a person who feels like I cannot adulting today, but really they got issues. Mental health days, yoga, a quiet room to meditate, to breathe. Ping pong table. Donovan CPAs has a ping pong table, and a lot of the employees use it during tax season. Um, Pool table, on-site gym memberships, childcare on site. And I know that's a little bit difficult, but it's not impossible. During tax seasons, how does that look like during tax season for some mothers? Provide activities for family unity. EAP, I mentioned that earlier. Employee Assistance Program, 6 to 8 sessions of counseling, no question asked. And of course, healthcare.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. And I do want to close on this last note, and you shared this when you were on the Upstream Leader podcast, and it's your concept of the 5 ACEs. Can you talk a little bit about that before we wrap up for today?
Yeah, yeah. I came across the 5 aces from the book Nine Lies by Robert Paul and Greg Smalley, and I found it very helpful for my couples counseling and marriage counseling. And so I'm going to share that with everyone. Number one is aware, right? The first A's, self-awareness, learning about yourself and your protective mechanisms. We talked about that earlier, your defense mechanisms. How are you triggered? What triggers you? Something happened to tell you that your buttons have been pushed? What are the signs physically? Do you sweat? Does your face turn red? How do you act out? How do you react mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? Number two, accept, right? This is the hardest part. Can you accept that you are only human? Can I practice self-compassion? We were told many times to suck it up, buttercup, tough it up. You're too soft. When that happens, self-compassion is the last thing we want to think about. Can we honor and accept your humanness? Can you give yourself permission to say, I'm hurting. I'm tired of toughing it out. I'm done. I need to rest. Number three, allowed. Allow yourself to see a therapist or phone a friend. Allow yourself to seek higher power. Allow others to help you. Number four, attend to your feelings, frustration, loneliness, and fears. What am I feeling right now? Is this familiar? Better yet, have you felt this way before? And how old were you when this happened the first time? Am I amping it up? What else is going on? Am I tired? Am I thirsty? Am I hungry or hangry?
Hmm.
What is the truth? What would I want to feel? What do I need here? Rest, restoration, take a nap, eat something, drink water, right? Um, do I need counsel? Talk to a friend or therapist. Once you get answers to these questions, then number 5, act on it. And that's my 5 aces. And I got this from um Nightlights. But
That's
eh,
terrific. That's absolutely terrific. Well, this was by far maybe one of my favorite office hours that we've done. Ethan, thank you so
aw,
much
thank you.
for sharing your passion and your vast knowledge on this subject. It comes across that you certainly are passionate and care very, very deeply about your
Um,
profession in this topic. Do you have any final thoughts for us before we wrap today?
yeah, real quick, I encourage you to seek a counselor on a regular basis to prevent burnout. We have regular annual health checkups, right, to ensure we have the optimal health. And we have biannual dental checkups for healthy teeth. Why can't we see a mental health therapist annually or semi-annually to obtain optimal healthy livings? And by the way, this July, I will be speaking at Upstream Academy in Chicago. And I am looking forward, if you guys are going to attend Upstream Academy in Chicago, I look forward to see you guys, all of you in person. Come and
Oh,
say hi.
oh, that's fantastic. That's so fantastic. Thank you so much. I feel that we've shed some light on this taboo subject. I know that it's an area that we can all do better in accepting and supporting and recognizing. I think, as business owners or team leaders, we've got to think about our people over our profits. And I love the takeaway from Brene Brown that you shared of sitting in the dark without judgment, right? And it's such a visual for me of what does it look like to deal with your own nonsense and then
Mhm.
help somebody else deal with theirs. And I think that that is really what this comes down to. And again, in the business environment, it's still our responsibility to show up for our team and be our best selves and help them be our best selves. So to our audience, I want to thank you for joining us today. This may be the one office hour that if you do share with a colleague, this should be it. Brittany will send out the email with the link in the next day or two, and it will be up on our website in the resource section. Again, Ethan, thank you so very much. I appreciate it more than you know. And I wish everybody a wonderful rest of the day today and a happy, healthy, and safe weekend.